Well, welcome to Focus Today. Steve with you along with Patrick Doyle from Veritas Counseling. You know, it has been a while since you and I have been able to talk.
It has been.
So
finally we got Perry out of town.
We
can
have.
do something.
Yeah, who? So it's good to have you here. You know, we talk a lot about issues that are important to people as far as relationship. I mean, that's kind of your big situation there as far as how do people get along, how do groups of people get along, what is it that you can't figure out really is the problem that you might see. Right. And you've hit on a topic that I'm very interested in because I have no idea where you're going to go with this. And so it interests me to know about tying in what is anxiety, which I think I'd like to have you, first of all, define what that is, because I think people might be nervous. That's not anxiousness. So what is anxiety, and how does it relate to the church, which I would assume is a body of believers? So anxiety, when people come to you and you define, you can tell they're anxious, what does that mean to you?
So when you say nervous, that is anxiety.
It's a level of anxiety.
Yeah, just like when we say upset is another way to say angry. Okay, so we have different terms that really all mean the same thing, but what they're doing is they're defining degrees. So somebody who's nervous about giving a speech, that's normal. Okay. Okay. Somebody who is paralyzed in their home and can't leave because of the anxiety of what might happen, that's not normal. And there's an impairing degree of anxiety. So there's a kind of anxiety that's normal. You know, when you have anticipation about, you know, somebody important you're going to meet or something important you're going to do. That's normal.
That's a common thing. People speaking in front of an audience, that's one of the biggest things that people have a problem with. Okay.
However, you know, anxiety that's crippling, when it starts to debilitate the person's ability to live, and a lot of anxiety is internal. So you wouldn't necessarily see it on the outside. Sometimes it gets out there, but a lot of times what people are doing is their mind is on fire with what ifs and how comes and what abouts and what if that happens and I don't know about this, and so they're measuring every single thing, and so subsequently their ability to take a risk is nearly destroyed.
Oh, it becomes immobilizing.
Immobilizing. Okay. So that's on a grand scale, but let's bring it back to like more of a relational scale, like where I'm worried, really strongly worried or anxious about someone's acceptance of me. Okay. Okay, so I want them to like me. I don't want them to see that I'm inadequate in some areas. I don't want them to, you know, judge me. There's all kinds of things that people think about that keep them from being who they really are. Okay, so then enter in the church. You ever been to church where you felt like you had to look a certain way or be a certain way? Okay. Yeah, okay, so you think that might increase anxiety?
Especially for people who it's all new anyway.
Yes. Okay, so
I see what you're saying.
That's one area where there's a problem. The other problem is that, you know, in my experience, Steve, I get the opportunity to talk to lots of people, the majority of which are people who go to church. And I hear this over and over and over again, is they go to somebody at church, and somebody at church, I believe with good intention, but unhelpful direction. It's a good intention, but I just don't think the direction is very healthy. Says to somebody who's struggling with anxiety, you know, if you prayed more, you would probably have less anxiety. Okay, well, sometimes that might be true. But as a blanket answer, that's avoiding the actual issue. People are not anxious because they don't pray enough. And I would imagine people with a lot of anxiety probably pray a lot, like, God, please help me, God, please help me. You know, so that kind of thing is what I'm getting at, is the way we culturally approach someone who's struggling with anxiety. And I would say this is true across the board, not just anxiety, but depression, anything else. So before we get too far down the show, because I want to be able to come back to this, the other thing that our culture is involved in that I strongly disagree with, and so this is clearly my opinion, okay? So anybody who's concerned about where it's coming from, it's coming from me. It's coming from years of experience and also the research of a doctor named Dr. Peter Breggin. I'd encourage anybody who wants to check this out to look it up, Dr. Peter Breggin. He was a Harvard psychiatrist. But he did a bunch of research, and his conclusion was that there is no biochemical reason for depression or anxiety or any mental illness. He said there's zero biological evidence that anxiety or depression is biochemical, which then led him down a trail of starting to investigate all the drugs that psychiatry uses to heal these problems. So what he says is that that is basically built on something that's scientifically untrue. There's no biological reason for your anxiety or your depression.
So that then leaves what?
So that leaves dealing with what causes your anxiety.
Okay, because you can't blame your biology or what, I suppose your heritage maybe?
Yes, your genetics.
Genetics?
Right, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Right, and so this is what people do is that say, well, and so now I have anxiety and I'm biologically malfunctioning, and so there's nothing I can do.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
So,
it's just who I am.
And I have to have these meds that last forever. And by the way, the meds that generally are given for anxiety are in a class known as benzodiazepines. And if you want to do some research on that, I'd encourage you to do it. If you look on Dr. Bregan's website, you'll see lots of research. But those drugs are not going to solve anxiety.
Okay.
In fact, they're not, one of their withdrawal symptoms is anxiety.
All right. Well, let me ask you this then, because we know that people whose family might have had suicide within it, that there is statistically more of a higher risk of suicide in their children and following generations. So if we then say, okay, if it is not biological, then it has to be perhaps environmental. There's something else that's going on. It doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It's just for different reasons than to say there's something in my DNA code that makes me that way.
Well, if my dad commits suicide, wouldn't that make me more susceptible to doing that? Since
the statistics show that's true.
That's what his example was.
And your kids and
so
other relatives.
My dad was an alcoholic. So what I watched as a kid is I watched my dad deal with reality through drinking. Is that going to have an impact on me? Well, of course. So at a bare minimum, we know that's going to have an impact on you. So that's where we should start, particularly when we don't have any evidence that the anxiety or whatever is biological. And this is, research done by a psychiatrist. So,
that is a hopeful thing, though, because what that means is that you just don't throw up your hands and say, well, that's the way I was born, and I can't change anything. Now you can go down other avenues to say, okay, how can I stop this perhaps trend that I've been noticing from continuing?
So back to the church. Okay. So one is we offer, trite spiritual sayings or guilt about you having anxiety, or we say, you're bad if you have anxiety, you're something wrong with you, and if you take medicine for your anxiety, there's doubly something wrong with you.
Oh, you've seen that?
Oh,
really?
Absolutely.
People who are prescribed that?
Yes, because many people believe that they're exchanging their faith for the medicine. And so the reason why I brought up the idea about the medicine is because I want people to know that there's an alternative to that. Most medical professionals that deal with anxiety, I just had a client yesterday who went to a doctor and was given all this medicine, and they're in the process of withdrawing. So the doctor didn't get any of the nuances of what was going on in that person's life, because their viewpoint is that the antidote, the healing of these issues of anxiety or depression is medicine. So I'm saying I believe there's another option. I believe love, empathy, compassion, understanding, confession. Those are things that are going to lead you to a place of healing, not management.
And I think what happens is we all fall into this. We want to help somebody out. So we'll throw out those trite answers in the hope that, they haven't thought of this before, which is probably the most basic thing. And we have done something to help them. But I don't think we really have a culture where it's one where we're willing to stop and say, you know what I can do right now is empathize with you. I don't know the answer either, but I'm glad you told me about that, and maybe we can work together to find a solution. But no, it's just easier to say, oh, you'll get over it. No, solution, okay, let's go for a latte. As if that solved anything at all. Well, not the latte part, that could. But I mean, the latte could, the latte could have some sort of medicinal effect, but that'd only be temporary, I'll admit.
But so the other thing that I see happening, though, Steve, is that people, when someone's struggling with an issue, people in the church a lot of times tend to give answers that are geared to make them feel better, not the person they're talking to. So then it becomes about the person who's uncomfortable with your anxiety or uncomfortable with where you're at or your truth. And so why is it that happens to us? Why is it that as a group of people we have that tendency? That's one of the things I want to talk about, because I think if we could focus ourselves on helping these folks in a way that's more beneficial, we could have a huge impact in a positive way.
Yeah.
Instead of continuing to do what I would say is harm with someone who's in that struggle.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really important that we talk about it. And I know, based on the emails that I get and the people I see on a regular basis, that this issue is happening. But it's not something I've heard a lot of people talk about. What I've heard people talk about is they complain about how the church copes with it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But they don't actually offer any solution or any help. And so part of what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about that, how we could be more helpful, and then we can talk more about what anxiety looks like. I mean, I think defining the problem is less important than helping it, because most people who are anxious know that they're anxious.
Yeah.
They don't need you to define it for them.
Good. We are talking with Patrick Doyle. He's with Veritas Counseling. We are talking about anxiety, and I think what we need to do also is I want to get more of a definition about how we can identify somebody with anxiety, because I think it's easy for people who might not normally feel anxious to categorize somebody in the wrong way. So we're going to be talking about that coming up in just a couple minutes. Keep it tuned right here for Focus Today.
Hi, I'm Paulina, and I work at the Dove TV. Did you know that when you support the Dove TV, you have a profound impact, not only in our community, but around the world? It's your continued support that takes the inspiration and hope in the programs we produce and makes them available to the thousands of people who are watching these videos online every week. Help bring encouragement and hope to our valley and beyond by making a secure online donation today at our website, thedove.us.
Welcome back to Focus Today. Steve Johnson here with you, along with Patrick Doyle, of course, with Veritas Counseling. Good to have you back.
It's good to be back.
It is good to see you. We're talking about anxiety, being anxious. What is it really? Is it just a nervous fidgeting, or is it more than that? Well, of course it is. But we're kind of getting into the underlying mode of it, because we're discussing how easy it is for a friend to give another friend a suggestion about an answer to solve all their life's problems, and it doesn't have anything to do with the problem they're facing. Let me ask you this. I want to first ask, I think of societies that we think people are sedate, calm, and very hospitable, friendly, and all the rest. Yet there is an underlying current that you never see. And I think of the Japanese community.
Interesting.
You go to Japan, and I know that I don't have the numbers, but I know that the suicide rate is pretty high.
They have the highest young adolescent suicide rate in the world.
Oh, and they've got, not unlike the British system, that when you go and you test for your classes, you're pretty much locked into what career you got, and talk about causing anxiousness. Yet you go over there and you may think that everything is the most calm, serene thing you've ever seen, but underlying all of that is a lot of anxiousness. So as we look to the United States, we're pretty much, we're just out there. I mean, we don't, do Americans hide anything? Not really.
We make a spectacle of it.
We make it a profession almost.
Exactly.
Do you see that we are becoming more of an anxious society if we go with the idea that just the hustle and bustle causes us to have a level of that?
Yeah, I would say the answer to that question from my perspective is yes. I think people are more anxious, and I think it has a lot to do with a lack of foundation. And there's all this external pressure. So like for, I think, kids today growing up with a handheld device, they get so much input, and they get the ability to see so many things. And those things, you look at Facebook, for example, people aren't putting their whole lives on Facebook. They're putting the parts of their lives on there they want you to see, right? So, but if you looked at that and thought that that's what it was, that was the description of their life, you could get the wrong idea. And then the other thing that people do is then they take that information and they start comparing themselves.
Okay, sure.
And comparison will always lead to some sort of problem for you. You never win when you compare. As soon as you start comparing yourself, most people are comparing themselves from the one down position. They're looking at the other person going, oh, I didn't, I should have, and I'm not that, I can't, and I should have. And so it becomes an ability for you now to find evidence for why you're inadequate. Right?
Yeah.
So, and you look at Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, all these things. And remember, these things are many times people are putting just what they want you to see. And putting everything up there.
Let's elaborate a little bit on that, because I know that for years before we had the social media, we had magazines would show the perfect male, the perfect female, you know, and you're always comparing and you're going, wow, that's not right. That seems so obvious. I think it's a little more subtle maybe on what you're saying with social media, because people are going to show the underbelly. They're going to show you what. Well, here's an example. I mean, it just brings up some stuff. You have friends who, like every other day, feel they have to change their picture,
their profile picture,
because of one that isn't quite as good, and the other one has to be better. I mean, this just shows how that can be almost evidence of a level of anxiety too, to have to improve in some way or present themselves in a different way.
So, for me, if I was going to just cut to the cure for anxiety.
Wow. That's really early in the show.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk more about the problem. Okay, cut to the cure, and I'm sure we'll find some other problems there too. Yeah.
But so if you're struggling with anxiety, it's my belief that the issue is that you feel unloved or inadequate.
Wow. Okay.
Okay, and I would say that's probably at the base of a lot of what we would call, you know, diagnosable mental illness. So, you know, you have God entering the picture and saying, you know, I know everything about you. And as a result of my love for you, I've taken care of it, and I'm satisfied with you. I love you. I see you as perfect. I'm not waiting on you to get it together. I'm satisfied. Oh, okay. So there's a lot of relief in that. When I've talked to people who are in anxiety, they're constantly worried about the future.
Oh, really? That's interesting. Okay.
Anxiety is all about the future. Depression tends to be about the past.
All right.
Okay. So the future, I mean, the future is...
you wouldn't be anxious about the past. You would be anxious about the future.
Yeah, and so your anxiety can also get fueled by your past.
Right.
But generally people are like, you know, are they going to like me? What about this? Is that going to go okay? Is that job going to work out? I don't know. Can I do that? Am I going to be able to, can I have... And there's all these things that are going on in their minds. And so then you might have an actual situation like somebody is snarky to you, or somebody does harm you or something. Yeah. And then from that, in your mind, you go to a whole nother level and you build a whole scenario about what they were thinking, and what they perceived about you, and how they really know what's in your heart. I mean, it goes into intellectually, you go to a whole nother place. And so now this one event is this other huge event, but not in actuality.
You know, this brings to mind something I saw at a coffee shop the other day.
Okay.
You know how so many times coffee shops are used for job interviews?
Yes.
And, you know, it's a nice casual place to meet. I saw a guy
You were in a coffee shop?
I was, actually. Wow. And I was reading a book. But I was more people watching than reading the book, I think. It was kind of one of these things where you're kind of looking around, okay?
It was another excuse to drink coffee.
It was. And another latte, double cappuccino, please. Yeah. So I'm noticing the people in there. I'm kind of a people watcher, I guess, to some degree. And I saw this guy, and, you know, he was, I'd say, probably an early 30s something. And he was waiting for somebody. You could tell that, you know. But it wasn't an anxious, it was just kind of there and all. And he was just kind of a normal guy. When this person came, because I was trying to figure out what's going on here. Person came, this guy was like falling over his feet over this person. And I thought, what's going on here? I mean, the smile was the biggest smile you saw. And, oh, yeah, of interest, everything they said, how are you doing? Oh, I'm doing great. You know? And it was like, whoa, this is really overdone. And this shows me right there was a huge level of anxiety.
Yes.
I had to figure out who is actually trying to get the job here. Was this guy trying to get the perfect employee, or was he the one running for getting the job?
Right.
And I saw later that there were a couple of them, and they were all talking. But I thought, you know what it showed to other people, but I don't think this person realized it, was how false their persona came across. And I think that can turn other people off, which causes them to get more anxious.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, it's kind of a cycle, isn't anxiety?
Yes,
to some
and
degree?
here's the other thing that happens to that point is that if I have a lot of anxiety about being around someone, then when I get around them, they feel awkward because they can feel my anxiety. And then I'm like, see, look, there's something wrong with me. And then that creates more anxiety, because now the next person I talk to, they're going to see it, but I'm actually generating that by pulsating the anxiety.
So you know what, this shows me the anxiety isn't necessarily a person who feels anxious with fear, but it could almost be over the top, and then could slide into depression afterwards almost. Huh?
Well, yeah, it could. But here's the other thing. So people talk about having panic attacks. You ever talk to anybody who's had a panic attack?
Yeah.
Okay, so panic attacks are real things.
Yes,
They're a physiological reality. Okay, and I've talked to lots of people with panic attacks, and when we start really getting into the issues of what's going on, we always find things that are the source of why they get so anxious. Okay, it's just anxiety on steroids, because I've built it up in my mind and my heart so much that I am, and sometimes the anxiety is so subconscious that the person doesn't have any conscious awareness of why they're so anxious.
Right. Okay? So how do you unfold that? How do you open that out?
That takes time. And this is the other thing that's the problem, is that you're not going to, somebody that has that level of anxiety in one conversation, fix anything. You're not even maybe going to get to the even, edge of it. So it takes a lot of energy and time to really help that person, because 9 times out of 10 the people I've dealt with, they're not conscious of the why. They suppressed it. But once we get there, they're amazed at, like, whoa, I don't have to, oh, okay. Wow. And so they start to connect the dots of why that structure got built in their mind, and what was the source of it, and what's true. Is it really true? And I've talked to so many people that, like, for example, somebody who has trauma, they're in their 50s or 40s, and they're blaming themselves for some traumatic event, like a sexual abuse, when they got abused as a kid. They're blaming themselves all these years later, and when we have the conversation, I'm like, well, wait a minute, that wasn't your fault. You were a child. You can't be at fault for your adult parent or neighbor or somebody's actions. You're just a child.
Does it take another person like yourself to bring that up? Because they must have thought that, you would have hoped.
No. Because really? Listen, everybody who does abuse blames the victim. And when you're a child, what defense do you have?
Yeah, right.
This is your adult. This is somebody that you know. So, and while it might be in there, it doesn't get a lot of traction. So think about this. I have an event when I'm a child that all these years later I'm still living on, as if it were true. Okay, now the event was true, but so it's what I call the right information with the wrong implication.
So you could have actually been fooling yourself by believing a whole plot line that didn't exist. But,
exactly.
And you think, well, I've thought of it so long that it had to.
Yes.
There had to be something about that.
Exactly. Right? So while the truth of the event may remain, what the conclusion you're drawing from that is what the problem is. So if when my dad is abusive to me as a child, does that mean I'm a bad person? No. But did I convince myself that it did? And did it cause me a lot of anxiety? Yes. So I'd go into a room and I would automatically be afraid because of what happened to me previously. And why wouldn't someone be against me? The person in the world who's supposed to love me more than any other doesn't.
Yeah.
So, but you see, that was subconscious. I wasn't walking around thinking that. But I couldn't understand why I kept putting myself in a position where plus I was doing some illegal things that created anxiety too. But so there was a whole construct that got built.
Yeah.
Okay, so part of it had some truth to it, but much of it was stuff that I just conglomerated together based on what I had experienced. And so once we start picking through that, man, we can really find some relief. And we can find relief that's long term, not temporary.
Yeah.
It's not just I take a pill and get 4 hours of relief. I don't have anxiety as a rule. I don't have unhealthy anxiety. I get to a place of peace, which is really what I'm getting at, is that anxiety is the lack of peace. I would say that about depression. I would say that about a lot of things. But what's standing in the way of the peace? That's what we have to get to. And most people who get to a place of debilitating anxiety don't know what the cause is.
And it takes another person to talk that through. Okay, you know what? I think this is a good time to take a break.
Okay.
And let's move into some of those things that you may have found that are causing people not to be able to discover it on their own, and they need somebody else, and how we can be that person to help them possibly.
Okay.
And there's a lot of things here. Anxiety, a little bit more layered, I think, than what we all thought. Patrick Doyle with Veritas Counseling. We'll be back with more right here on Focus Today.
Hi, I'm Paula, and I work at the Dove TV. Every day we get letters and emails from people who've been encouraged, blessed, and challenged by the programs on the Dove TV. But we couldn't do it without you. Did you know that more than 90% of our income comes from people like you? You can help us continue to bring inspiration and hope to our community by making a secure online donation at our website, thedove.us, or call us at 541-776-5368.
Welcome back to Focus Today. Steve Johnson here with you, along with Patrick Doyle. He's with Veritas Counseling. We are talking about all things that might get you anxious. Actually, it's about anxiety, and I think we've already been able to discover that being anxious is not just one thing. Oh, that person is anxious.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of layers and reasons, and how depression even comes into play with it.
Yeah.
The idea of, you had mentioned before we took the break on what is standing in the way of diagnosing anxiety. You were talking about how when you sit down and talk to somebody who seems anxious, they don't know why it is, and you're kind of peeling away at all of that. I was going to ask you, and so I will right now, do you find it is a process that they discover why somebody might be anxious, or is it an aha moment?
It's both. Usually there's an aha that leads to discovery, because once that aha moments, then all these experiences that I've had start to have different meanings. So
and they're able to put it together to say, I didn't think that was related, and now it is. And do you find a lot of it has to do with what happened in the childhood of a person?
Yeah, it has to do with what happened previously, generally. And so, like, for example, let's take another scenario. We talked about somebody who's in an gets abused when they're young. Let's take somebody who's in a very controlling, abusive relationship, okay, for years, okay? Then they somehow get out of the relationship. Guess what? They still have issues based on having to survive that for years. So when they go into a situation, they're still thinking based on that old paradigm, okay? Because it was so embedded in them. Because to survive it, it's so difficult. So it takes time to sort of unfold that thought process, undo that way of that worldview, if you will. Because when you're in an abusive environment, it becomes your predominant goal is to survive.
And they've already put in some sort of coping mechanism that may not have really solved the problem, but it masked it over for the time.
It helped them get through.
Yeah.
And so, so what I'm saying is that stuff doesn't just, and that's the other thing that this is the other thing about the church, is why I wanted to bring this up, is because we tend to talk about things in victorious language. Right. I overcame. We hear the testimony, I was a terrible person, I got saved, and now everything's better. Which isn't really true. Those testimonies are false in the sense that they're only giving a part of the information.
Let me tell you one thing that it just popped in my mind when you said this. I was involved in a video production about people who had gone through terrible things, and the conclusion was this video then was going to be shown to a lot of people.
Right.
And so there were like 4 or 5 of those people that I interviewed. And I kind of knew what their problem was, but I didn't really want to know too much, because then you're asking questions that somehow the audience may not have understood, because I wanted to discover it myself.
Right.
The short story is, what I found out was these people had not resolved these issues.
Yes.
And I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist or anything. But
which means it was pretty obvious.
Well, it seemed that way to me. Yeah. And you know what was interesting was the video was never used because they wanted to have, I think, that victorious ending.
They wanted the bow.
And I had to say, you know what, I don't know how to do that. I mean, you look through the video here and this person is still hurting.
Yes.
They have come through it all, and they're on the road. But there was no period, and my life now is wonderful.
Well, and I think
scenario.
that's always the case, because it's an ongoing process. So I was abused as a kid. Do I deal with that today on a regular basis? No. Can it creep up? Absolutely. If I'm going to struggle, I'm going to struggle. The first place I'm going to struggle is with the lie that my father told me, which was I was a worthless piece of junk. Okay? So that's the first thing that's going to creep back in. And I don't live in that anymore, but it still shows up. So the idea...
The impact is there no matter what you do.
Yes, but it doesn't control me anymore.
Right.
I have victory, if you will. I don't like that word in that term because it puts a lot of pressure on people. Do you have victory?
Yeah.
Well, I guess. I don't know. I hope. So instead of us having the freedom to honestly struggle, we have to look a certain way, which creates anxiety.
And I was going to say, there's another level of it right there to show that everything is fine now.
Right. And so, from my perspective, God says that confession is the way to healing. Well, if I can't confess because I have to be victorious, what's going to happen?
Yeah.
So if it doesn't become safe enough for me to be honest, I'm just going to get deeper into whatever pathology I have. Right? So the church then becomes a place where, I would hope the church becomes a place where it's safe enough to deal with that. Because we have the God of the universe to help us. We don't have to pretend. We don't have to have a role. But there's a lot of comparison in the church.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, we have a standard. So, everybody's trying to live up to the standard. Well, God's standard isn't the issue. The issue is that God loves you and is forgiven you, which gives you the freedom to be honest about who you are. But if the church doesn't reflect that, and I cannot tell you, Steve, how many times people have come into my office and said, I ask, why haven't you talked to your pastor about this? Well, I can't tell him this. I don't want to get judged. I don't want to lose my position in the church. I don't want people to know. Well, what does that tell me about the environment?
Yeah.
That it's not safe. And so I'm thinking about if we could become a safer place as a group,
how
much more healing we would see.
And how that would change the whole environment of what we define as being a church.
Yes.
And we say it, but it's putting it into place because we'll say, well, the church is actually a place not where people are perfect, but it's a place where they come to, it's kind of like a spiritual hospital.
Right.
But we say that, but then we don't really put it into action.
But most people don't feel that.
Yeah, right.
What they feel is something else. And there's lots of versions of it. And I'm not saying it doesn't happen because I know that it does. I'm wanting it to happen on a broader scale and at a deeper scale so that people have the opportunity to start to confront the reality of what's going on inside of them. Because that's where anxiety comes from, is that I got all this stuff I haven't dealt with.
Yeah.
And so I'm anticipating all these bad things. And I'm doing all these scenarios in my head. And so I'm kind of paralyzed emotionally. And anxiety is going to kill relationships. That's just what it does.
Let me ask you, somebody who is anxious and perhaps in a relationship, and I want you to talk more about that, but do they even recognize that they're anxious? If they have been this way all their life, or virtually all their life, they might not even identify it as that, do they?
Most people know they're anxious.
They do? Okay.
Yeah, and then they're anxious about it being anxious.
I see. Just feeds on itself.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and then when that's the case, well, then when I'm in a relationship, I'm going to do something that's going to validate why I'm anxious. Because I'm going to act, because I can't control it. So then I can't tell you how many times I did this early in my life where I was anticipating the person's response, and I was anticipating where the conversation was going to go, and I was sure I was going to mess it up, and I did. Right.
Self-fulfilling prophecy.
Exactly. Kind of. And so then I'm like, well, see, look, I'm all messed up. And so the snowball just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And listen, because I mess up a conversation doesn't mean I'm inadequate.
Yeah. Do you find that anxious people tend to attract other anxious people? I mean, I'm thinking in a marriage relationship, let's say, that kind of thing.
Anxious people tend to isolate.
Themselves?
Yes. They tend not to have relationships of depth. Because they're anxious. And anxiety is so much about what you're thinking. It's a very internal process. I'm scenario building a lot.
And it's future-based, right? That whole what will happen,
and so
could happen.
When I scenario build, what I'm actually doing is scenario building is really about trying to prevent myself from having the experience I don't want to have. So I I'm like, well, if I do this and then I do that, what about this? And then if they say that and because of this, I don't know about this. So then what about, I got to go here, and what about then if I do that? And because it's all trying to prevent that thing you don't want to have happen to you.
Yeah.
Whereas depression tends to be, I'm concerned about my past. I don't want my past to repeat itself. I'm still living in the events of the past. Whereas anxiety, I might take that event that was hard, and now I'm future casting. And I'm looking to make sure that I don't ever have that again. Now what I say to people in this situation, how much control do you have?
Yeah.
Can you actually stop what's going to happen? I mean, I think control's a myth, because if you and I had control, I don't think either one of us would be here right now. I might be in Fiji under the water looking at tropical fish.
That sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, wasn't it?
Yeah,
I would much. I mean, I love you in this place, but I would much rather do that actually. But I'm not even in any danger of that happening. I don't think so. You know, the fact that I could control the outcome, I've got mountains of evidence that that's not true. So. If in my anxiety I'm pushing myself to try to be aware and control the outcome, how successful am I going to be?
Well, and you know what comes to mind also is that some of the things that we say we need to do for the future, since you say anxiety is kind of future-based, the unknown and what to do. You know, we need to plan. You'll hear it on TV, you know, for the future as far as your kids' education, your retirement, and you know, all of these things sound like good things, but to me, I think it's like a credit card debt for somebody who's so underwater in credit that it just comes as a reminder of how inadequate they are and how they haven't done what they should have.
Right, exactly.
I mean, if you hear, let's say an ad on TV is, by the time you're 25, you should have started saving X amount of money. Well, now you're 55, and you're saying, I didn't start at all, and so now that's going to get you more anxious, even though the intent was a good thing. And I could see people coming alongside, especially when they say, Patrick, you know what you should do? Well, now there's another requirement on them, right? By perhaps a very trusted individual like myself.
And they may have had a good intention, but it doesn't change the outcome was terrible. Right? And so I would encourage people who want to help to banish the word should.
Okay, we do use that a lot, don't we?
Because that.
Or if I were you, here's what I would do. That's a should.
Yes, should is about me knowing what you're supposed to do.
Okay, all right. You know what? We have one more segment here that I want to talk to you about this. Let's get into that a little bit more about people, maybe those who aren't anxious, and what they should do or shouldn't do. Patrick Doyle, he's with Veritas Counseling, and we're talking about anxiety and all its different forms and how it shows itself. And are you anxious? You want to stay tuned for this last segment, or if you know somebody who is. It's coming up in about 2 minutes here on The Dove.
Hi, I'm Daniel and I work at the Dove TV. You know, compared to Portland, Seattle, and LA, Medford might be considered a small market, but at the Dove, we're excited about the opportunity to make a big impact right here in our community. And you help make that happen. Did you know that more than 90% of our income comes from people like you? You can help us now by making a secure online donation at our website, thedove.us, or by phoning 541-776-5368.
Welcome back to Focus Today. Patrick Doyle is with us. I'm Steve Johnson, and we are talking about anxiety and the coping mechanisms. That's just one of the things. I mean, there's a lot of things. It's hard to, I won't even attempt to try to recreate all the things we've talked about. But as we're discussing this particular problem that can be triggered by a whole lot of things, let's talk about the people who want to help their friend who has some sort of something that's related to the future, anxiety, there's just a frustration with the moment or whatever goes on. You made a very good point that we should never use the word should. Here's what you should do. Because it's like an ultimatum type of a thing. I suppose that's how it's taken, isn't it?
Well, it definitely makes you feel like you don't know what you're doing, and they do.
Okay.
And it might be true. That might be true. I mean, the should might be true, but it doesn't mean I can do it. I mean, most people in a difficult spot don't need any more information about what they need to do because they're paralyzed. That's a problem. I'm struggling. I don't need more things to do. I need resources to do them, which is different. Okay, so coming alongside someone cannot be a conversation. which is how we want it to go. Well, we had that conversation. I told them the truth, and now, by golly, they need to just do it.
He or she should know about it because I gave them the answers.
Yeah, and how many of us have done that when someone...
Yeah, with the best of interests, really.
I mean,
you want to fix it.
And how many of us have been the one who was told that and didn't do it?
Yeah.
You know, I've been told many things I didn't do. Okay, and so, you know, knowing what to do is not so often the problem. It's that I don't have the motive or the ability to do what I already know I need to. And that's why I feel stuck. That's why I feel overwhelmed. And so somebody with strong anxiety, that stuff is debilitating. It impairs your ability to live. So when you say you should, that's like telling the person, you know, you only have one leg, but you should do the waltz. Well, I'd like to, but I'm kind of missing a leg. Can you do anything about the leg? You know? And so one thing I would do is I would say to somebody who wants to help, don't have an agenda. So if I go into a situation, and this is anybody who wants to help across the board of issues. If you go into that person's life and your goal is to fix them or to help them, you've ceased loving them. Because what you're doing is now about you. You're going to help them. You're going to give them your wisdom. You're going to get them along. No, why don't you just go be with them? Because that's exactly what Jesus did. Did he have the power to fix? Absolutely. Did he always tell people what to do? No.
Let me ask you, if we were to back this up, because we might have parents with kids and are saying, you know what, I don't want them to grow up with having a problem of anxiety, but I don't know, maybe I'm setting things up that they would. What advice do you have to help to prevent that kind of environment from starting in the first place?
Well, two things that I think lead kids to anxiety is high expectations and unrealistic goals. Okay, and coupled with pressure.
Sure.
Okay, so here's what happens is if a kid thinks that his value to his parents is based on his performance, he'll probably struggle with some anxiety.
And that could be in sports or anything, I suppose.
Across the board. So
extracurricular, supposedly fun activities that now become an agenda.
Oh, I can tell you from having a kid in high school sports that, you know, there's a lot of high pressure put on kids about their performance, which is really about the parent living out a dream through the child. And that's not ours to do. I mean, my job is to love my child and to be with him, not to control him or to pressurize him. Look, who's in charge of his outcome? Me or God? So what I need to do is hear from God about what he wants from my child and get in line with what he's saying, instead of me making up my own agenda and trying to impose it upon my child.
We had great plans and you're going to college. You know, that kind of
you know. And that story has been told a bunch of times, right?
Yeah, and how many movies have been written about it, and you look at it and you go, is that really true? And it is,
absolutely.
Really.
And you know, sometimes because the communication isn't good, kids make assumptions. And that their parents are pressurizing them. So if you see the kid is like that, I would just say you got to sit down and have a conversation, multiple conversations over time, because kids aren't generally going to just open up to their parents. They want us to be happy with them. They don't want us to be disappointed. They want us to, you know, trust them. So that, you know, that self divulsion is usually going to take a little bit of time. And that also depends on the relationship that the child has with the parent and the way the parent has dealt with stuff historically. So again, nothing is singular. There's always layers. This is where you just have to accept this. And when we think we can just give a singular truth, and you know, back to the church, I think this is one of the things that we've done is we've made it like if you just had the right information, everything would be okay. But I have tons of right information that I cannot imply. I mean, I cannot work out. I can't make happen. I'm in a process. You know, 5 years ago I couldn't do that. Now I can. Next 5 years, I don't know what I'm managing now to get to a better place. But it's not ever like that. So if I have an epiphany today, that doesn't mean everything's changed. That means I start putting things together in a different way that will lead me to change.
You know, and you mentioned earlier about somebody who might, in a church environment, say, you know, I can never go to my pastor to talk about this kind of a thing. Right. Do you think the structure of how we've kind of designed, and I know this is a broad stroke, but designed how church functions is designed for those quick, immediate answers and not for that long-term relationship that you're talking about?
Well, and let's just take the church service, for example. We're going there to fellowship. Mm-hmm. But if you're sitting in a church, you're not fellowshipping, you're an audience. And one guy is talking, and no one is talking back. It's not a conversation, it's a monologue.
Yeah. Right.
How does that in weekly environment, and then you go on Wednesday and it's the same thing on a smaller level. Okay, but it's one guy telling us what to do.
Yeah.
So that system tells us when there's a trouble, you got to talk to that guy.
And of course,
or some guy like that.
And the bigger the church, the less opportunity you have to have that kind of relationship. In fact, you could enter in and out without having talked to anybody, really.
And so what I hope to see is much less. I mean, do we need people to preach? Obviously, but we've gotten to a pretty narrow process within the church, as far as I'm concerned. I think we got to have a lot more dialogue. So where there's people in real time having conversations about very difficult issues, where, oh, I'm struggling with anxiety. Okay, well, tell me more. Not, we got to fix that. No, I can't fix that. That's God's business, but I'm here for you. Tell me more. Why are you anxious? What's going on? And then tomorrow or the next week or in 3 days, hey, Steve, how's that going? What's happening with that? Or, where are you at? Do you want to talk again? So it's not once a week. Mm-hmm. It's life on life. We're traveling together. We're yoked up together. We're pulling in the same direction. Well, the normal Sunday service doesn't bring that into play.
I think that's important for all of us, looking around at the people who are with us.
Yes.
There are a lot of hurting people there for different reasons.
Right.
And it may be masked. That's
9 times out of 10. 9 times out of 10, it's going to be masked. When somebody's in church and they're unmasked, it's because they're in a high state of pain.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So no one's going to go to church, unless they're pathological. But most people, when they get to church and they're just undone. I saw a guy this past week at my church who was undone. He just and then I talked to his friend that brought him, and the guy's having a very strong struggle right now, and God was just all involved in that. And there's a whole story that led up to that guy getting there. And so my point is that guy it wasn't just what was going on in the service. It was what was going on in the service was changing or revealing all kinds of things that had been going on. So there's always context, and this is the other thing. We have to have context with people in their lives to be of effective help. We can't just come in, drop truth, and then walk away.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I really want people to do is, if you're not called, if you don't feel strongly like you love that person, don't try to help. You're better. You do less damage by not helping than trying to help when you're really not prepared.
Yeah.
And so I think people need to take that a little more seriously instead of having the obligation. That would be the other thing I would say.
Yeah.
Do not help anyone out of obligation. So I look at...
You're putting in your time and...
Yes, right.
We'll get through this and come to a conclusion.
Obligation and need are two reasons why you should not help. Jesus never did anything out of need. He only did what the Father said. So people's needs were not his issue. We make other people's needs our issue. No, that's God's issue.
That's true, yeah.
That's God's issue. My issue is to obey what He says and help you. So that tells me right now, I'm not responsible for your outcome. So if you don't listen to my advice and you go harm yourself further with anxiety, I still love you, but I can't fix that. If we have a conversation and you change profoundly and have an epiphany, that's still not me.
Yeah.
That's God working through me. Okay, so when we get that pressure off ourselves, then what happens is we're actually able to be present with people in a way that they can feel. And when somebody knows you love them, that's the greatest healing that they can get. It's not about you giving them information. Listen, in our world, information is not the problem.
Yeah.
Anybody struggling with anxiety has probably already read 10 blogs. And they've got information up the wazoo, but what they need is somebody to be with them.
All right. Anxiety, Patrick Doyle with Veritas Counseling. How can people get in touch with you?
They can call 622-6018, or they can go to my website, veritascounseling.com.
All right. Patrick Doyle with us on Focus Today. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. Join us again every Monday through Friday right here on The Dove.
Hi, I'm Jim and I work at the Dove TV. Every weekday between 6 and 8 a.m., our award-winning news and sports team bring you the best morning show around. It's live, it's honest, and it's a whole lot of fun. And you help make it happen. Did you know that more than 90% of our income comes from people like you? You can help us continue to air local programs that share your voice by making a secure online donation at our website, thedove.us.